About us as people celebrating St George's Day. Ladies and gentlemen, the people on the stage today are us. There's no celebrities, they're working class, they're us. I'm going to show you and ask for your support. There's going to be some stories of people on this stage, and I want you to start backing and supporting our own people. Now, when I say our own people, I don't mean just white people. Don't be foolish. I mean everyone. So I'm going to introduce you to someone I know. He's a fellow bricklayer. But before I do, I want to tell you a little story. Yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock, my stage and screens pulled out. Why they pulled out, that's between me and them. I will sort it out. But I will not. My resilience is high. I will not be beaten. Now, whatever method of sabotage that was, look at the face. What they didn't know is I have a friend. I have a friend called Joe. Where is Joe? My friend Joe is a scaffolder. So late last night, I was on the phone to Joe. Joe, I need a favour. Scaffolders and bricklayers really get on. But we pulled it off. At the drop of an hat, Joe was here this morning. We got permission this afternoon and we set the stage up. So the moral of the story behind that, be resilient, do not be beaten. Make the best of what you can. Thank you, God. Now, I'm going to play you something about the history of St George, because it seems to be very fashionable for those to attack us about the history of St George. So I want you to listen very carefully.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to take you on a journey back through time to explore the story of one of the most enduring figures in Christian history, St. George. A man whose name echoes in churches, legends and cultures across continents. While most of us know him as the dragon-slaying hero of medieval lore, St. George's true story runs deeper, woven through courage, faith, sacrifice, and the legacy of a Christian martyr. St. George was born in the late 3rd century, around the year 275 or 280 AD, in what is now modern-day Turkey, in a region then part of the Roman Empire. His father was a soldier in the Roman army and a Christian, and after both his parents died, George followed in his father's footsteps and joined the military. He quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a high-ranking officer under Emperor Diocletian. Now, at this point in history, Christianity was still a persecuted faith within the Roman Empire. Diocletian, though a capable ruler, was a staunch pagan and deeply hostile to Christians. In the early 4th century, he launched one of the most brutal waves of Christian persecution the empire had ever seen. This is where George's story truly begins, not as a warrior on the battlefield, but as a soldier of faith. When Diocletian issued an edict commanding the persecution of all Christians and the destruction of Christian scriptures and churches, George refused to comply. He boldly declared his Christian faith in front of the emperor and his court. Imagine the courage it took, a Roman soldier standing before the most powerful man in the empire, denouncing an unjust law and affirming his allegiance to Christ. George's defiance cost him dearly. He was imprisoned, tortured, and eventually executed, most likely beheaded, around the year 303 AD. His martyrdom left a lasting impression on the Christian community. He became a symbol of bravery, faith, and righteousness in the face of tyranny. But how did George the Martyr become the dragon slayer of legend? The tale of St. George and the dragon first appeared centuries after his death. In this symbolic story, George rescues a princess from a terrifying dragon that demands human sacrifices. He slays the beast and brings peace to the kingdom. This myth was not meant to be taken literally. Instead, the dragon came to represent evil, paganism, or even Satan himself, while George stood as a figure of Christian virtue and divine power triumphing over darkness. This legendary image caught fire during the Middle Ages. Crusaders, knights, and kings alike adopted St. George as a model of chivalry and Christian valor. He became the patron saint of knights, soldiers, and many countries, including England, Georgia, and Ethiopia. His red cross on a white background became a symbol of protection and identity for armies and nations alike. But beyond the myths and symbols, St. George's impact on Christianity is profound. He is revered not just for what he did, but for what he represents. George reminds us that faith is not passive, it demands action. Sometimes it requires courage to stand against the tide, to risk everything for what is right. His life and martyrdom echo the very heart of Christian witness, to bear suffering with grace and to proclaim truth with unwavering boldness. Throughout the centuries, churches have been dedicated in his name across the globe. Icons and paintings depict his struggle against evil. Pilgrims still travel to places associated with his legacy, and every year, on April 23rd, St. George's Day, Christians and non-Christians alike commemorate his story. In closing, St. George is more than a historical figure or a legend of dragons and damsels. He is a symbol of enduring faith, an example of moral courage, and a reminder that true heroism often means standing firm in the face of injustice. In a world that still wrestles with fear, oppression, and doubt, his story continues to inspire. Thank you.
So, let this be a little historic lesson for us all. St. George was not English, but what he stood for was Christianity. And he bared the tragic lesson of standing for what he believed in. He stood for what he believed in. Now, for those people who try to attack our history and mock us to say St. George wasn't English, let me tell you something. I was working with a bricklayer last week and he told me that St. George's dad was from Canning Town and he was a bricklayer. And his mum was from Yorkshire. So that's good enough for me to claim. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll introduce you our host, Mr. James Norton.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dean